Before we jump into this episode, I want to give a massive shout out to our amazing sponsor this season, Jo Higgs from Jo Higgs Creative. Jo is a freelance logo and brand designer with over a decade of experience, and she is all about helping female-led businesses stand out and attract their dream clients. Right now, Jo is offering a fantastic free downloadable guide called Building Your Brand. It dives into the basics of branding and how to really boost your brand awareness as a small business owner. Plus, there's a super helpful checklist you can go through at your own pace. You can grab it at www.joannhiggs.co.uk/free download, and I'll make sure to pop the link for that and all the ways to find out more about her in the show notes too. In the meantime though, let's get back to the episode you're here for. If you are trying to build a brand that feels like you and actually attracts the right clients, then this episode is for you. I am joined by Jo Higgs, a brilliant freelance logo and brand designer, and we are chatting all about how to stand out as a small business, the lessons you can steal from the big names, and why your brand is about so much more than just a logo. It is packed with practical tips, real talk, and plenty of inspiration to help you grow your business with more clarity and more confidence. But before we dive in, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to Show Up and Be Heard, the podcast for women who want to grow a business on their terms without the overwhelm. I'm your host, Becky McAvoy, multi-award-winning social media marketer, international speaker, and the dreamer behind Be Heard Socials and the Boss Your Socials Club. This podcast is all about cutting through the noise that comes with running a business while juggling multiple priorities and spinning all of the plates. So if you are after practical, no BS advice to make social media, business and life feel simpler and more doable, or you just want a supportive space where women in business feel seen, heard and inspired, then you are in the right place. Right then, let's get started with this week's episode. Hey Jo, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm doing very well, thank you.
I am so excited to have you here for so many reasons, partly because I know you really well and I know that you're amazing, and I know that lots of stuff we'll chat about will be really exciting, but also because you are the first ever sponsor of Show Up and Be Heard, the podcast. So you are sponsoring this season, which is like a super, I hope it's exciting for you as well, but it's exciting for me.
Yeah, very exciting, very exciting.
So yeah, I won't go into all that now because like I am known to go off on a tangent, and there will be lots of information about that everywhere, and you'll have heard a little bit, hopefully, if all of the tech has worked well at the start of this episode, about like who Jo is and what she's done and why she's sponsoring it and all that kind of stuff. So we will get going with the podcast if you are ready to go. I always start with, obviously people have heard a little bit about you in terms of sort of what your business is and your professional bio type stuff and all that fancy stuff. But do you want to tell us a little bit more about your story in terms of like how your business came about and how you became a business owner? Is it something you always wanted to do, or did it happen by accident? Just a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's quite interesting because I've done a couple of podcasts where I've talked about it. So I have reflected on it a few times. And I think, so my parents were both self-employed. And I think you've mentioned this on other podcasts where you didn't really think of them as business owners, but obviously they were. And so in that respect, it was quite normal to like run your own business when I was growing up. But it wasn't something that I sort of thought I'm definitely going to do when I was younger. I always knew I wanted to do something creative. But it was quite difficult. I think like back in the 90s, there weren't many creative jobs. It's a little bit different now. And so I found it quite hard when I graduated to get a job in design and stuff. So I did lots of different things. Like I was a medical rep for a while. I did different like admin roles and different things. And then long story short, I ended up sort of, I think around 2007, moving to London with my then boyfriend, who's my husband. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to get into design properly, this is the place to do it. So that's really when I became a designer. But I just worked in a, normal design job. So I worked for somebody. I didn't freelance at all. And then, as is the case with a lot of women, I think, I had kids and that blew my world up, basically.
And then they ruined your life. But no, I didn't mean that.
Absolutely not. Yeah, but so when I had my first child, I found it wasn't too bad, although I then did actually move out of London. So I was in London for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And then I moved out of London and that made it a little bit harder, but I did contracting roles and stuff. So again, although technically it was my business, I had a limited company, it was very much, I was going in and being a sort of temporary member of staff in someone else's business, if you like. And then fast forward a couple of years, I had my second child, and then I found it like near on impossible to do that contracting and work it around like having regular work and everything else. So I did have a couple of years where I didn't really work in the industry at all. And then when my son started, I did other jobs, but when my son started school, I was like, I'm going to try and do this myself. I think it was just after lockdown and stuff. And I think I'd learned about social media and I knew that there were other people doing that. And I could kind of see how maybe I could get my own clients. And that was kind of quite a new concept. So I think there was part of me that did actually always feel like I could do it. I'm quite organized and I'm quite good with people. So I kind of always felt like it was within me, but I didn't really know how to even start. So it was kind of born out of necessity. But I did always think that maybe I could do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I love that because you were saying like it was just after lockdown. So what's that, like 5 years ago-ish? Like 4 or 5 years ago, isn't it? And the fact that you're still doing it now is incredible. And I think lockdown, because I think so many people were put on furlough or made redundant even, or, you know, jobs changed or whatever during that time, that there was a massive rise in people trying things for themselves and doing things.
Yeah.
I was like the opposite. I'd started my business 6 months before lockdown, which was horrendous to then go. But I think it did show like a lot of people that. And what you were saying as well about, like I have spoken about that before on the podcast. And weirdly, I was talking about my mum and dad being self-employed last night to somebody and not realising that, because I was talking about how I've recently been to my eldest's. So he's in year 6 and I went to like a careers carousel fair thing they do there to talk about running a business. And I was a bit like, the letter had come home and it was like, if you have anyone in the family who's like a fireman or a policeman or a teacher or woman, I keep saying woman, but a teacher or whatever. And it's all these very important jobs that obviously we need and really respectable jobs. But there was nothing in there about like, it felt a little bit like archaic. And I just spoke to a teacher and I was like, I don't know if it would be interesting and it's fine if it's not. But I could talk about running a business and my podcast and that kind of stuff. And actually, I think it's really cool that we're living in a world that, you know, like I was saying, this is a conversation I was having last night about the careers fair. I was saying about my mum and dad and that I never really looked, and I don't even think they'd have said they ran their own business. Like they were just, or not just self-employed, but they were self-employed and they made it work. But I think what they definitely showed me was that basically you can make your life work how you want it to work. Like it's so my mum stopped being self-employed when we went to high school because that was her choice, and you know, there's a various different story around that. But I think there's a lot about, you know, like that necessity thing that you spoke about, like actually you've got options. And I think often we don't think that we have. And I've had quite a few mums after the careers fair. Well, I say quite a few, I've had like 3. But mums messaged me to say like their child had come home and said, Becky's told me I can be my own boss and I can do what I want. It's like, yeah, you can. So actually some of them are talking about it. And I think that's really cool that like you said, the narrative was different when we were growing up in the 90s and whatever.
Yeah, you kind of had like I think it was mainly like tradies, which was, my dad was a builder and carpenter. It was mainly tradies or like you worked for somebody. And, you know, there obviously were other people that ran like other businesses, but not many women, obviously, that like representative in the 90s doing that kind of thing. But I think that for me, I think that with COVID, I think the fact that people just suddenly everyone was working from home. So I think like a few years before that, to say, yeah, I'll design this for you, and they'll say, well, where are you based? If you said you were based at home, they would just be like, well, you're obviously not a professional, or you know what you're doing, or whatever. And you'd have to like almost pretend that you had an office or pretend that you went into work or whatever. And it just was a bit of a leveler for working from home because everyone had suddenly done it. And also there was a much wider audience on the internet, like on socials and stuff after like COVID happened, because people were stuck at home and they started discovering things they hadn't seen before. So yeah.
Yeah, do you know what? I've never really thought about it like that, actually. And I don't know if it's because like it was only 6 months before the pandemic that I started my business. But you're right, I think it probably was like a real leveler. And also what you said about like, so my dad was a roofer and my mum was a hairdresser, so they were both like traded, or like they trained for something. Like it was and actually the reason they were probably self-employed was more because roofing companies would prefer you to be self-employed than have you as an employee. So I don't think it was that my dad was like, oh, I'm gonna do this. And my mum, you know, like had to rent that. Well, she was in a salon, and then when she had us went round, like we used to sit on like the kitchen floor with her while she cut people's hair. So it was like, yeah, it wasn't like you've got now, is it? Where it's like, well, obviously it wasn't social media because that doesn't exist, but like graphic designers and virtual assistants and all that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah. My mum's a hairdresser. We used to do that too. Yeah. And I mean, I think my dad used to work for other people, but then he then had his own business with his own customers, if you like.
Yeah.
And so there was like a change for him in that way as well. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's that it was more like there were certain jobs, I suppose, obviously as well. They weren't like computers in the same way and things like that. Even you didn't have any online jobs because there wasn't anything online. You know, it didn't exist.
Good old days,
or it existed in the very primitive form.
Yeah. But even my dad, I suppose, actually, because there were points that he was employed by roofing companies. I think he probably did what they told him to do, you know, like register with HMRC or whatever, because you need to be self-employed or, yeah, it's just, but I do think it set your life can be what you want it to be, basically, without me ever realising or them ever intending necessarily that to be the message that they were showing. So I just think, that's really cool. Anyway, I realise I am going to go off on a tangent, and this is the danger of, well, it's not a tangent, it's all relevant, but obviously we have got branding stuff to talk about because you have got loads of I know you've been sharing with me some of the things that you want to talk about, and I'm really excited about talking about it because what we are going to be talking about today, which I probably should have said sooner than 10 minutes in, although you will know this from the intro, is what small businesses, so on the theme of everything we've just been talking about really, can learn from bigger brands when it comes to branding. And Jo pitched this idea to me and I was really excited about it because I'll be honest, lots of people come to podcasts and say, oh, I'll speak about, you know, they are brand designers or whatever, but there is only so many times you can talk about various aspects of that. But this is an angle that I've never really spoken about before, and I think will be really interesting for everybody listening. So
stay tuned, guys.
We'll see on the download numbers, but you know, we'll get to that one. I do think it's going to be interesting. Stick with us. I don't really know, like, is there a good place that you say starting? Like, is there like things that you really like? So you're talking about big brands and like their logos and, you know, massive budgets and all that. Well, not just logos, I suppose their brand as a whole, like big budgets, that kind of stuff. Is there stuff that you really notice where, like, as someone who designs specifically for small businesses, that most people don't? And does that stuff really matter? Like, is there stuff that we get hung up on that we shouldn't get hung up on? Like, what do you notice from big brands that...
Yeah. So I think that one of the things, so if I just quickly go through what a brand is and what branding is and stuff. So basically your brand is what people think of you. And then your branding is how you influence that. So it's important to remember that you only have so much control over that. That's the first thing. You can obviously create things to show you in your best light and everything else. So it's really important, for example, with branding, before you think about the identity in terms of logos and colors and things like that, that you get all your fundamentals right. So I think that things like your core sort of business beliefs and things, and who your clients are, and just everything that is more about not exactly strategy, but just like knowing your business inside out and really analyzing it. Because if you do the design yourself, or if you get a designer to do the design and you haven't gone through all of that process, then you're just not going to attract the right people. So you need to know who you're attracting and who you want to attract and everything else. So that's the first thing, because I think people get quite hung up on the aesthetics. Of course, you want branding to look good, but actually your branding is sending a message. So as long as it sends that message, it's efficient. And of course, we want it to, so for example, if you've got a luxury brand, you want your aesthetics to look luxury, right? You don't want it to be written, you know, your logo in Comic Sans or something. But there's a whole myriad of things that will create that image. So your logo is like one element of that, if you like. So I would say the important thing is that you've got all your fundamentals right. And if you've got all of those right, generally you can't go too wrong with your aesthetics, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
what would you say those, like, just to summarize, saying you got your fundamentals right, what are the like key fundamentals for you? Like, obviously you've said about like knowing who you're trying to attract and that
yeah.
kind of thing. Is there anything else?
Yeah. So I think in terms of like preparing to create a brand identity, you've got things like, I've got to apologise because I feel like my brain's buffering at the moment.
We are, for context, for anyone listening, this is coming out in September, but we are actually currently 2 days away from both of our children leaving year 6. It's a lot going on.
And we're melting as well because we're in a heat wave. So yeah, so I apologise. And actually, that's one of the reasons I've put together the download, because it does lay everything out in nice, easy like things as a free download. But basically, the first thing is your
Can I just say, before you say that, you said about the download, I will have mentioned that in the ad at the very beginning, just explaining like who you are and whatever. But do go and check that out in the show notes, because the link's in the show notes for it. And that's a really good point, actually, because it might be worth going and downloading that, reading through it and listening to this sort of at the same time, because it will complement each other, if that makes sense. So do go and check that out. Sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, that's okay. No, thank you for interrupting me because my brain was buffering. Yeah, so things like your core, like who your core clients are, so who you're actually trying to attract, actually put a bit of thought into that, like who are they and where do they hang out, where are they, who are they and where are they. But also like things like the feel you want your branding to give. So if you want it to make people feel relaxed, or if you want it to make people feel excited, or there'll be very different branding types. And if you go into it not really understanding that, then you're just going to you could end up with beautiful branding, but it's not the right branding for your business. So if you're looking at all your fundamentals, who you're trying to attract, and what you really stand for as a business, which is great for solo businesses because you can really just narrow it down to what's important to you and get those core kind of business beliefs nailed down, and then just keep coming back to that. And I think that if you can get a designer to help, then they will sort of go through all of that with you to make sure that that's all correct, in terms of they will ask you all the right questions, basically. So that you've got all of that lined up.
Yeah, and I think, because obviously, big businesses obviously have the budgets and the teams, and like some of them will have enormous budgets, and obviously that gives you a massive advantage in being able to get stuff done. But is there anything you'd say like give small businesses the edge that big businesses don't have so much?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the main advantage is you can be agile. Like, I've done graphic design for big businesses, and my goodness, you will get you have everything is so nailed down and it has to be so precise, and then it will be sent off to somebody who's, I don't know, art director of some department, and they'll say, no, we're not going in this direction, and then it's just wiped away. And it never sees the light of day. I know people in big businesses who literally do jobs and work on projects and they never see the light of day. So I think for the fact that you've got a small business that you run, especially if you're on your own, you literally don't have to. You could just decide tomorrow, or today, now, that I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to try it. So the fact that you can be agile is actually really great for things like customer experience. So customer service is a really big one for, big businesses really struggle. I think once they get to a certain size, they really struggle because there are so many components, there's so many members of staff, and they're relying on all of them to deliver this. So they have to have a really strong kind of business ethos that runs through everything. And if you think about it, they're constantly asking you for feedback. Like, I mean, even if you bought a pack of crisps and ordered it online, you'd have to, they'd send you a feedback form sort of thing. So I think that in that respect, you can streamline things. You have direct kind of relationships with your clients often. I mean, I guess if you've got a product-based business, it's not exactly the same, but there are still elements you can put in. Like, who doesn't love getting a package with a nice little handwritten note in it? Do you know what I mean? Like, things like that. You can't do that with a big business because it's just scaling things up. It's quite difficult to keep that. So I say,
like you said earlier, which I really liked the sort of definition of, like, your brand is what people think of you, your branding is the like elements of it, whatever. But the what people think of you, like the little handwritten note or whatever it might be. I spoil this for people, but when when people sign up into Bossy Socials Club, or so, like a few people have just renewed for the year again, and I just sent like a little video to each of them, like it was through Bonduro, which I can link to the show notes in, actually, because the free version of that is really good now. But you can send little videos, and it was just little, like, I just want to say thank you. And like stuff like that is like, you know, I'm not doing that for and then that will make people think this, that, and the other. I'm doing that just as a nice thing. But that is part of the brand, isn't it? Of like, and like you said, like a big business could never do that. Every time you buy something, you get, you know, this thing. So yeah, I like that. And also what you said made me laugh about like as a small business owner, you can just kind of decide to do something and then do it the following day if you want. I was like, that is both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
If you are,
Depending on your personality.
if you are like me, where you're like, whoa, I've got this idea. But all jokes aside, I do love, like, that is one of the things I love most about running a business, is you can literally decide, I don't like this thing anymore, or like, you know, like I want to change my branding, or I want to change my website, or do this, and you don't have to go through several processes or stages of approval. You just literally do what you need to do it.
And one of the reasons I really love working with solo businesses is because I really get to inject that person into the branding, and it isn't just the business, if you know what I mean, as a separate thing. So that's really lovely, because you really get to really connect with it in a unique way, which a big business can't exactly do. So yeah.
One of the things I want to ask you about is that, and I always love this when you share on your socials about like the thought process of going through like a design, because when you have like average person like me that literally knows nothing about it, like there's details in it that people, because like you said, like obviously it's about the story and all that kind of stuff. And I know you shared, and obviously if you're listening to this you won't be able to see it, so Google this, as Jo mentioned some of the examples, but like the details sometimes in things like logos or branding that you just literally don't notice. Do you want to talk about a couple of the businesses that kind of do that, or the logos, and like how that works, if that makes sense? So I was thinking about like the FedEx example that you gave me before, and you blew my mind that with something that I'd never seen before. Now that you've shown it to me, and I do suggest Googling it, I now can't unsee it. And I'm like, of course that's there.
Yeah, so basically I was talking a bit about like, well, often it's in an icon logo, which is something that doesn't include letters, but sometimes it can be cleverly done within a word like based logo, and it's kind of like an additional detail that kind of represents something. So it's difficult because it's one of those things where you mustn't force it. Like if it doesn't work and it's just for the sake of it, then definitely do not do it. But if there's an angle, and this is something that's like a designer's dream, is when you get so sometimes I'm literally talking to someone and then I look at the letters of their name of their business or whatever, and I can see something comes out at me and I'm like, oh my god, it's gonna happen. And it's just like that is like sort of one of the most exciting things. So but basically, just to give you an example, as you say, that people can just quickly Google, we were talking about FedEx. So if you look at FedEx, it's between the E and the X, there's an arrow. There's a shape of an arrow. So when you actually look at it, you can see they haven't forced it. They haven't made the words look weird. They haven't sort of created the sort of odd looking like situation, but it's just that those two letters came together and it naturally creates that shape. And the arrow, FedEx, you know, like deliveries, like it obviously makes sense to have it in there. So another one that people can think about is something like Apple. So if you ever think of the Apple logo, they've got that little bite out of the side, and then they've put exactly that shape as like the stalk, like the little leaf coming out the top. And apparently they did that so that it was obvious it was an apple and not like a cherry or some other kind of like fruit. But just adding that small detail gave it clarity that it's an apple. So it's like really small, and to most people it's just like, well, obviously it's an apple. But you think, well, would I have known it's an apple if it didn't have that bit on it? You know? So I've done a few things before for different people, and I think one of the examples that that I sent to you was just like, I did a logo for an artist, and straight away I could see within the letters kind of like a pencil shape. And again, it's like, it's really subtle, and lots of people won't notice it. Like when me and Becky spoke earlier, she had not noticed the arrow, and she told me a good example on a Toblerone. So go and check out Toblerone and see what you can see in the mountains. But yeah, so I guess the point is that they're not crucial to get you more clients. And, you know, if you can't have one, it's really not like the end of the world, and you absolutely don't have to have one. But sometimes, so I think it works really well with, so say you got a business like called Catfish or something, or Doghouse, you know, like something that's like obviously physical objects that the designer can do something creative and fun with. And then that's really cool. But if you're like Jo Higgs VA, that's not going to work, because you don't instantly see an image when you see any of those words. So yeah, so it is a fun one to look out for when you're looking at logos and things. I think the reality is that other than designers and really sort of observant people, maybe.
Yeah, and obviously it doesn't have to be, because I mean, lots of people listening to this, I mean, that's one of the real benefits of working with designers, because like you said, like it doesn't make or break a logo, but it is really cool when you see it. And I've just looked at, and maybe on the day this episode comes out, you might have to share the logo. So it's Hannah Lipsey is the artist that you were talking about, I'm assuming, with the pencil in it. Because Jo had sent me the logo, and like I said, go check her out on socials, and I'm going to try and remind her to share it to her stories that day, because you told me about the FedEx one, and you were like, can you see an image in there? And I was like, no. And then you pointed out the arrow, and I literally cannot unsee that arrow now every time I look at FedEx. But you didn't tell me about the pencil in Hannah Lipsey. So when you started talking about that, I was like, what images she created in those? Because I've got them on my screen. And I didn't see the pencil until you said. And like you said, like but it's just a really nice touch. And actually, it's a really nice touch if you have worked with a designer and you have got that in there. Like I talk about this, don't I, about sharing it on your socials and saying, did you actually know, like the A, the L and the I make a pencil? And it's quite a nice like story behind your brand as well. So I talk about it, not in the design of my logo, but the reason that I am Be Heard Socials is obviously it's about being heard on social media, but my maiden name is Heard and my name is Becky, so it was Be Heard was always my and it's a nice little story to tell behind it, isn't it? Like most people looking at Be Heard Socials, unless I tell them that, won't ever know that, but it's just like a nice little detail. I do need to say about the Toblerone one though, because I know you said don't see it. I don't know, I'm tempted to say, people tell me if they can see it or just say what it was. No, I'm going to see. If you've listened to this, I want you to go and look at the Toblerone thing and tell me what you see in that logo. But I will just say that the only reason I know this is because my stepson, probably a good 10 years ago maybe, said something about, look at that on the thing, or why is, I can't say it. I'm just going to tell you what it is. Basically, in the mountain of the Toblerone logo, there's a bear in it. So everybody knows the mountain's there, but you don't see the bear. And my stepson basically turned around and said something like about the bear on the mountain. And me and my husband were like, what? So, and we looked at him and like, oh my God, there's a bear on the mountain. It's literally like, and I have spoiled it. I kind of wish that I could see if you can. Now I think someone's going to come and say, oh yeah, no, I knew that anyway. But seriously, if you didn't know that, please let me know. Because when Jo showed me the arrow in the FedEx, I said about Toblerone, expecting her to know. And she was like, what? And then we both Googled it. So yeah, I love cool stuff like that though.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's a talking point and it's interesting, but also that does sort of lead into a different point to make. Is one of the mistakes I see people make is trying to have their logo or their logo suite do everything. So actually those mountains aren't really the logo. The logo is the word Toblerone, right? So they are an additional asset that they use on all of their Toblerones. So it's like a reoccurring like aspect of their branding. So I think that sometimes people ultimately, your logo needs to tell people who you are very quickly. So if you're Apple and you're a well-established like super brand, then great. We all know that's an Apple Mac, that's an Apple product, that's that, because you can see the Apple on it. But when they first came out, they would, Mac or whatever they had that written next to it. Like nobody would have known, well, that's obviously like a tech company. Do you know what I mean? Like it's an Apple. Like why on earth would you ever know that that's what it relates to? So I think that when you're starting out and you've got a small business and you're trying to get clients, one of my main tips is like, first of all, it sounds stupidly obvious, but make sure your logo is legible. Like, most people don't actually have an icon logo at all, but they might have like a monogram or something, so they can use something a bit smaller, or something like that. But they don't tend to, mainly it's writing. But you can add really interesting aspects to it that aren't completely as obvious as that. So, for example, like little leaves coming out of something, a letter, or something like really nice and subtle that makes it show it's bespoke and makes it show that you didn't just sort of do it up yourself, that makes it sort of elevates it to like a bit of a more classy level. But people need to not be looking at, for example, if your logo is your name and thinking, oh, how is that spelled? What is that letter? Like, you just can't have that, because it just creates potential issues and people lose interest very quickly. And if they can't even read it very clearly, then that's a problem.
And also, I suppose it's thinking about where it's used, isn't it? Because on the socials, especially, like the places that used, it's so small that like you need to be able. There's a lot of logos that I do see on socials that I've got literally no idea what it says. And yeah, so I think that's really important, because you can get hung up on, like we're talking about Toblerone and Apple and FedEx, but God, the size of those companies and the budget they've got behind the designers and that kind of stuff. So it is really cool to have that. Actually, I suppose that's almost a thing to learn, is like, you don't have to be like the big brands. Actually, what you need is just to clearly explain who you are, or it be really obvious who you are and that people have found.
Yeah, so I think one thing that you can take from big brands is that they have flexibility and in their options. So that is something that I would definitely recommend people do. So if you literally have one logo, you're a little bit restricted with that. So normally you would have at least two, and then you would have them in like opposing colours, if that makes sense. So ideally you'd have more than two, but it depends what depends what your business is and the name of your business. So if you had an icon or a monogram, for example, that shows up, in your little on a little thing on socials or something.
Yeah.
You can still see it. Whereas if you've got a really long name and you just have it in a long format, you won't see it, when you've reduced it really small. However, that will work really well on the top of like an invoice. So you don't want to have a great big square chunky thing that takes up like a third of the page on your invoice. Having that sort of flexibility is something that big brands do have. They normally have, if they've got an icon, they will always have like a Word version as like a logo that's like written as well. And then they'll just use it in different ways and in different color ways and things like that. So I would say, as a small business, make sure that the two key things are, make sure that your logo is like clear, and make sure that you've got at least two, if not more, versions of it that fit different situations.
I suppose as well, the other thing to learn from the big businesses is how simple they've actually kept it. So they've got those like amazing details in there that gets people talking. But actually, when you look at it, like you said, like Toblerone, like that isn't their logo. Toblerone is. Like, it's literally the word Toblerone. Like that FedEx logo, like, yeah, it's got the arrow in it, but it's literally just the words FedEx. Yeah. And even some of the other ones you sent across, like BBC is literally BBC on a black background. Uber is literally the word Uber. So they might have these fancy details, but they haven't, that's not their focus, is it? Like, that's something they've done to sort of get people talking or, notice whatever. But ultimately what they've actually done, like you said, even Apple to start with, but obviously Apple are enormous and don't need to now, but to start with had Apple written on it.
Yeah.
So like, actually, yeah, they're doing all these fancy things and aren't they cool? But ultimately they've got the name of their business like really clear.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think that you just need somebody to look and instantly know they're in the right place, like that they've reached the right business, or if they've come across you, they know what you do or what kind of business you are, and without having to think about it. And that takes like all of the branding, but your logo is sort of often the thing that is consistent throughout everything. So it kind of looks the same. So you might have different pictures, but then you have like the same logo maybe in the corner of it. That keeps this is this person's picture. Do you know what I mean? But they should also have a look and a feel so that the person kind of almost already knows that there's that person's photo, because it looks like a lot of their other photos, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Honestly, see, I told you it was going to be interesting. I am really conscious of time, and I said this to you at the start because I do love to chat. There is one more question I just want to ask you around the sort of, or just get your thoughts on around the branding stuff. And then there are a couple of questions at the end that we always ask that I'm really interested to hear what you say on as well. But I know that you, I've heard you talk about don't convince, attract. And I really love that. Like, I almost love that as just like a motto in general, because it works on socials and everything. And to be honest, in business and in life,
Exactly.
it can work everywhere. But do you want to explain what you mean by that, like a little bit?
Yeah. So I think as a business owner, you have to get really comfortable really quickly, if possible. The quicker you get comfortable with it, the better. You're not going to appeal to everybody, and not everybody's going to want your service, or not everyone can afford your service, or whatever the reason is. And it's not personal. It's just that's the way it is. And one of the things I was thinking of the other day, which was quite funny, was me and my husband were thinking about upgrading our car, and we were looking at cars and things. And one of the cars of the current day that is quite reliable and everything else, and a few people sort of recommended, is a Skoda, right? Now, I cannot buy a Skoda. I just can't buy one, Becky. I will never ever buy a Skoda, literally based on like my 90s version of a Skoda was like, it was an insult back in the day to say, oh, did you arrive in your Skoda if you were slow? Or, you know, like, oh yeah, look at, you know, I don't know, going off in your Skoda. I don't know. It's just literally, it's just like the worst.
Wasn't there a game where it was like MASH, and it was like mansion, apartment, shack and house, and then there was cars down the side, and you had to play it, but the rubbish car you ended up with was a Skoda?
I mean, they were ugly, they were slow, you know, they just weren't great. I mean, I imagine they were cheap. I can't remember. I don't know. You know, I don't know. But anyway, so they've had a total facelift, and now they are like, they've really sort of, they actually look good. If you see one driving along, you're like, oh, that's nice. And they have like, their technology is brilliant. And apparently they're really reliable. They're always like reliable, but kind of boring. Anyway, my point is, it doesn't matter how great a Skoda gets. It doesn't matter if a Skoda is like a Lamborghini, but it is literally £100,000 less. I am not going to buy a Skoda, right? So there is no Lamborghini then. Well, that was one of the options. No, not really. That's a shame. My son wants me to buy one. I keep explaining it's not really a family car, and if we get one, I can only take one of you out at a time. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, they don't need to convince me. They've got a whole new audience of young families, or like young people. And I've seen some young people in them. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no point. They're not going to convince me, but they don't need to, because there's so many other people that can buy their Skoda. So I think that it's that thing of, first of all, like, you're just not going to win everyone over. And you just have to make peace with that. But even the big businesses can't. Even Skoda cannot win me over. I stand by it till my dying day. But that's literally an opinion, like a random, like, it's not even like factual anymore. My sort of understanding of their business, it doesn't matter what they do. So they need to be like forgetting about people like me. They're not trying to attract people like me. They're going for a younger demographic who don't have that kind of thing hanging over their heads. I mean, some people won't care enough of my age, and they'll just buy one anyway because they're good cars now. But yeah, so I think it's that thing of just like being comfortable with knowing that you're not going to win everyone over, and that's okay. And the people that do want, you know, you offer what you offer, and it will be a good offering, and people will come to you for it, but not everyone will, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I really love that. And I literally cannot get my head out of, because this is the way my brain works. In my head, I'm like, they've got a whole generation of people. Did you play that game, MASH? No. So basically, again, if anyone's listening and knows what I'm talking about, please tell me that I'm not going mad. Like, you had MASH, it was like you worked out what house you were going to have, what car you'd have, how many kids you'd have, and then it was something else along the bottom.
Right.
And it was, MASH was, you lived in a mansion, an apartment, a shack, or a house.
Right.
And then the cars were like Porsche, something Skoda, but Skoda was basically the rubbish car. And I literally cannot get my head out of what was the other things. I was like, I've got to listen to what
it's a budget where if you had the mansion, you had to have the Skoda, or was it like you play games and win more money?
Skoda, I think that was, which is wild. Like, obviously, this game was not based on logic, but I think it might have been something to do with like the letters in your name or something, and then you counted along and you had to, because they were all very, it was that type of game, wasn't it? Like where you worked out, it was the same, sorry, we've gone off on a real tangent here, but it was the same as if like you fancied someone when you were younger and you could work out based on your names whether you were going to, yeah. Or maybe that, I can't remember. If anyone can remember what I'm talking about, I'm going to stop talking about it because that is not what the podcast is about. But yeah, but literally, I was just thinking every time you spoke, I was like, yeah, there's a whole generation of people that never played that game. So you're all right, Skoda. It's fine.
They're the ones that are going to buy the Skoda. They didn't play the game. They're going to buy one.
Anyway, I will like bring us back to being about the podcast. No, honestly, I do find all of that really interesting. And I think that, like, I genuinely actually think that works across life as well. Like, don't convince people to be your friends. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's always convince people to do whatever. But I really like that example as well, because you're right. And I was trying to think then as well. There are, which I can't think of off the top of my head now, but there are certain things that I will never buy because of a certain thing. And it doesn't matter what that has, you know, does or says or whatever. And so I think that's a really like good way to think about it, especially as a small business owner. Like, and I talk a lot about you're not for everybody and actually embrace unfollows because you should be attracting the right people. You don't want the wrong people. But I just think that's a really nice way to visualize it, if that makes sense. So yeah, I really like that. Just a couple of questions that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. Obviously, the podcast is Show Up and Be Heard. And you have been amazing in the last like 2 years, year and a half, is it? Of like, since I've known you, like showing up and really putting yourself out there. So what things help you show up in your business, and what tips would you give someone else to do the same?
Yeah, so I think for me, like having sort of systems and processes really help. Anything, I find that my time's really fragmented, and so I can't always do things like often things come in and just sort of stop play, if you like, and I think a lot of people are like that. So I think if you've got like systems and processes, and that's why your membership's so great, because it's allowed me to do that with my socials, and that is how I'm able to do it, basically. So definitely having systems and things help me to do that. And I think you can do that for all sorts of things. Obviously, you know, your accounts or whatever it is, like something processes. And again, does actually tie in with big businesses, because they have processes. And actually, even if it's just you following that process, like, it doesn't matter that it's not for like a workforce, if you like, it's still a process. And if you stick to it, you kind of know where you are with things, and that kind of organization, because there's a lot going on when you run a business and you've got so many plates spinning, that I think systems and processes definitely really help.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, what I have taken from that is that you should join Boss Your Socials Club.
Exactly.
Jo is a member in Boss Your Socials Club, and it has been for almost 2 years. But no, I'm joking. But the systems and but that is why I've included that in Boss Your Socials Club, because it is the key to getting stuff done. And I think even, you know, if you weren't using social media as an example, like I think about like, you know, wanting to be on podcasts. I see a lot of people say, like, oh, I want to be on podcast, and then just put a social media post about it and then go, oh, I don't know why I'm not on a podcast. But actually, like, I've got a process in my Asana of how I apply for podcasts and what I need to do, the steps I need to take, and have it in my calendar so that it is actually like a mapped out thing, because things don't happen unless you take the action. And taking, like you said, there's a lot going on in a business. So taking the action is really like, it's overwhelming, isn't it? So if you literally have the system mapped out in front of you, then it reduces that overwhelm. So I really love that. Is there any advice that you would go back and give yourself in the early days of running your business, and what would it be?
Yeah, this is it's an interesting question, because I think that it's funny that whatever decisions you make, you're doing it with the information you have at the time, right? So I think that when I first started out, I felt almost embarrassed at my situation and who I was, just in the sense that, you know, I had a break from work and I was like a part-time mum, part-time working from home. And I sort of hid a little bit, and you can't get clients when you hide, funnily enough. So I think my advice would be for all people is to get out there, meet people, network. I mean, I definitely feel certainly in the last like 2 or 3 years, networking has changed a lot. So there's loads and loads of really approachable networking places, people. It's not all like stuffy. It's not all like really formal. You can find something that suits you. And also like memberships, try out a few memberships and things, but early on, because I think that I sort of hid a bit and like waited for quite a while before I relied on sort of word of mouth, which is very slow when you're starting from scratch, because obviously if you get one client, there's only one person going around talking about you. So that's not, that's quite hard to grow with. So yeah, so I think sort of getting yourself on like socials and joining groups, I would have definitely shown more of myself basically everywhere, because that's what people want to know in the end.
Yeah, and I suppose like from what you were saying there, it is like owning who you are and being okay with that, isn't it? Like investing in yourself as well, because there is stuff around, like some people might look at it and go, oh, well, she's had this big gap from work, I don't want to work with her. But then I now look at that and go, well, I don't want to work with you either. And actually, like, that's quite a nice place to be like, actually, if you don't like for example with me, it would be like, if you don't like that I take school holidays off, like, all right, see you later. Because not everyone has to work with you. But I think that's quite hard in the early days because you're trying to get clients to make money and whatever. So I also like what you said about, like, I've debated stopping asking this question on the podcast, because what you said about, I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but you do what you do with the knowledge that you have at the time. And I often hear people sort of say, not necessarily on this podcast, but like bigger name people say, oh, if I could go back, this is what I'd do. And I'd be like, okay, but you wouldn't have actually got to where you were. You can now not do that because, like you've got the audience and you've got whatever. So I don't always think it's helpful to take advice from someone who's like a few years into business. But actually, there are some stuff like the networking, joining memberships, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how long I was in business before I did, but probably a good year, maybe even a little bit longer than that, because I was frightened about investing, because it is scary to pay for networking events or, have a monthly outgoing or whatever. And obviously you need to work out if you can afford that. But I always now look at it, and after that, it was the best thing that I did, because like you said, the more people you know, the more people that are talking about you.
Yeah.
And I always say, right, like I look at, say, for example, the cost of a membership and go, can I afford that for 3 months to give it a proper go? And if I can, then I'm like, right, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you are just starting out, it's like, okay, but there's an awful lot going on that it's not helpful you sitting 6 years in telling me this. Yeah. But I think that kind of stuff is like quite easy to implement as well, because there's loads of stuff that you can do for free as well, isn't there? Like there's free networking events and stuff. So it's just being brave enough to get your name out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just like, don't underestimate just chatting to people, even if you're at the school gate or something, and mention what you do, or, oh, I've had a day doing this, or I've started doing this again, or because people actually do like to help you. Like they actually do, even if you don't want to go officially networking just yet and you're finding your feet and stuff like that. Actually, remember to tap in and to everyone you do know and tell everyone what you're doing, because in the main, people will actually want to support you. They won't, and you never know who they might speak to. And then, so I think that.
And you know what? I really like that as well, because I think there's a lot of people that I know there's a lot of people out there that say, like, don't have your friends and family follow you. And obviously when it comes to running ads, that becomes a different thing because of the way ads target things. But a lot of small business owners don't necessarily get to that point, or like it's further down the line where that sort of advice becomes a little bit redundant anyway. Or, like basically say, well, they're not your target audience. But it's like, my mum, bless her, well, it's on my dad's account, but I'm fairly certain it's my mum doing it, shares pretty much everything I do. And so does my sister. Like, they're very supportive.
Yeah.
They like everything that I do. And there's a bit of like, okay, well, mum, you're not my target audience, but you don't know like who out there that they're then sharing that to has a small business, or, like you said about mums on the playground or whatever, you don't know that they don't own a small business or have a partner that does, or, whatever. Like I was talking in the park with someone the other day about my podcast, and, and I've known them a while, and they were, oh, do you have a podcast? And I was like, yeah. Like, and I was chatting about it, and they were like, oh, I recommend it to so-and-so that runs a business and whatever. So I think that's really important as well. Yeah. It's like also a bit scary, because then when those mums from the playground come and follow you on socials, and you're like, oh God,
no, I genuinely forget people see it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when I say something about it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, yeah, you saw it. You saw that. I forgot that, like, all these people.
Be proud of that, because like it's an incredible thing, isn't it? Like, but yeah, so I love all of that advice. But honestly, thank you so much, Jo. It has, well, I found it very interesting. So I hope everyone else has.
Maybe we didn't lose people anywhere.
definitely let us know. Do you want to tell people where they can find you? And I will link to all of that in the show notes.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yeah, so mainly I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well, and that's under Jo Higgs Creative. Higgs is Higgs. So it's Jo Higgs Creative, and then my website is joannehiggs.co.uk, and that's where the download. Do I say the download thing now, or is that over?
Yeah, you can say yes. Download, and that will also be linked in the show notes. Do you want to explain a little bit about what's in it?
Yeah. So basically, if you go to joannehiggs.co.uk and then put /free download, you'll get through to, I mean, you will, I'll be totally honest, you'd sign up to my e-marketing so to get the email, but then you'll get sent an email with a download. And basically I would say it's mainly for people who are starting out, but actually I think it's still quite helpful if you're a few years in and you want to just check that you've got everything in order. But it's called Building Your Brand, but it's a breakdown of all the things I couldn't remember earlier in the podcast, of all the things that you need to make sure that you have in order, have sorted, clear in your own mind, to then get your actual brand identity kind of sorted out, and it's going to then really work for you really well. It also does give a little bit of a breakdown of more, like a bit more detail than what we've spoke about today about fonts and logos and things and colors and things, and just kind of what, a bit more about those things. But it's not very long and it's got lots of pictures. So go download it.
It's a perfect follow-on from listening to this episode as well, isn't it? Because obviously we've talked more broadly about stuff, but I suppose, like the fonts and logos, the fonts and colours and all that kind of stuff that you said you're explaining there, whilst is fascinating, probably doesn't make for a great podcast episode. But it does then give you that information so that you can go off and maybe take some steps.
Yeah, it just gives you a little checklist at the end that just means that you can just it's always nice to tick things off, and you can just have that, and just as you're going through stuff, have I thought about these things? Is it current? Actually, to be honest, sometimes when you start a business and then a couple of years down the line, your business has changed. So you want to just make sure that you are quite clear on all of these things. And again, it just gives you like a little tick list to put up or have, so that you can just make sure you've covered everything.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you. And honestly, thank you so much for your time. Please do go download the download, which will be linked in the show notes, and go connect with Jo on her socials and stuff, because she is just a genuinely lovely person to talk to, and also shares lots of lovely content as well. So thank you so much, Jo. I've really enjoyed it.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I am really grateful you chose to spend your time here. Before you go, if you love this podcast and you're a woman running a small business who wants to make social media feel easier and business life less lonely, I've got something for you. The Boss Your Socials Club is here to bring you inspiration, accountability, confidence and community. It's a place where we ban the word should, because we believe in bespoke advice that will work for you, your stage of life and your business. You'll get a monthly content plan, ready-to-use templates, accountability and action sessions, a private members podcast, expert support, and a brilliant community of women who get it. Honestly, it is packed with so much stuff. It's like having a mini social media expert in your pocket, so you can show up with confidence without the overwhelm. Membership starts at just £24 a month, and there's a pro tier if you want even more support. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time.